family-owned company that invests in as well as build the deep tech ecosystem, specifically helping deep tech startups, talent, as well as building the community. I'm very happy to be partnering with Sing Health for today's event, and I'm sure we'll be all very excited to start soon. Today we have a very expert panel of speakers who will be joining us, and to kickstart the event will be Dr. Jasmine Ong from Sing Health, who will be moderating the session. And may I invite Dr. Jasmine Ong as well as the rest of the panelists on stage. Thank you.
Okay, hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, SG Innovate, for the invitation to moderate this session today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. So maybe for a start, I'll just get the panel to kind of introduce themselves. Maybe, Puyen, you want to start?
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Puyan. I'm an AI ethicist, and I lead the AI ethics and governance team at MSD. So at MSD, we're a pharmaceutical manufacturer, and we make medicines and vaccines that save and improve lives around the world.
Oh, sorry, we have a response. So hi. Hi everyone, so my name is Amos. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of FathomX, and FathomX essentially is a medical imaging AI spin-off. We deal with breast cancer screening. We developed a computer-aided detection tool that was initially a research at the School of Public Health, but commercialized into a fully fledged product at the moment. So for us, we are an AI product and an AI company, and we do have a product, FX Memo, that's regulatory approved, and we've been through a lot of the challenges of answering the queries by regulatory authorities, and really happy to share the experience today. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Dave Myung. I'm on the faculty at Stanford University in the Department of Ophthalmology and the School of Engineering, and I am the director of the innovation program at Stanford. We try to launch new technologies and train the next generation of innovators in our field. I'm also director of a AI-powered screening program for diabetic eye disease, kind of spread throughout the Bay Area using an FDA-approved technology. And really happy to be here. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this event, and looking forward to speaking with you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Assistant Professor Tamara Lysart. I am faculty at the Yongloo Lin School of Medicine at the National University of Singapore. We teach biomedical ethics to the young and undergraduate medical students, and my research expertise is in the ethics and policy around emerging biomedical and health technologies, which AI is falling in scope.
Okay, so just a quick introduction to myself. So I'm a practicing pharmacist at Singapore General Hospital. I also happen to sit on the Sing Health AI office as a committee member, and very happy to be here today with this star-studded panel. So just to give the audience a little bit of context, so I'm going to bring out the example of ChatGPT again. So ever since ChatGPT was released, sometime late last year, it's kind of taken the world by storm. It has it holds great promise in terms of its potential to really transform the different sectors and healthcare and the healthcare space inclusive. But of course, along with that, there's been a lot of talk about the risks involved with the use of generative AI and also the use of these large language models. And I think globally, different government authorities or regulatory bodies are kind of struggling to kind of stay on top of the game in terms of regulating the generative AI space. So this kind of sets, the context for today's discussion. So in the next hour, we're going to dive deep into some of the challenges related to regulation, governance, and ethics of AI, particularly in the healthcare space. So maybe the first question that I would like to ask the panel, and maybe directed at David, because David is based in Stanford, and he does a lot of work with, for example, in global health as well. So based on your experience, could you maybe just share a little bit with the audience, what is the current kind of state of AI governance in the various jurisdictions, and of course, whether there's anything specific to healthcare itself within.
Yeah, I can mainly speak to the healthcare piece. At least in the U.S., of course, there's the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, that what they regulate is the marketing of new technologies. So to the extent that a company wanted to market AI as a product to help with human health and to sell a product, they are the governing body. In the U.S., we have, to my knowledge, 3 so far AI algorithms that are approved by the FDA. The first one was the one by Digital Diagnostics in April 2018, and 2 others have followed. Those companies are iNook and AEYE. And so they went through a specific approval process. As far as other types of governance, there are task forces, so to speak. That's a general term for key opinion leaders in our field. There are professional societies like the AAO, Academy of Ophthalmology, and Retina Society, and so forth. And task forces are running together that include other bodies such as National Eye Institute, and they come together to kind of create best practices and sort of guidances about how they feel the AI should be used, and there are also international ones. So generally speaking, in our field in medicine, there's these sort of task forces come together around certain indications, how to treat certain diseases, and so forth. So it's a combination of that sort of the governing regulatory body for sort of marketing of products, but also medical practice. So that's, I think, the sort of short answer for that question.
Yeah, so I think, just to add on, in the Singapore context, we don't have anything very specific in terms of AI governance in healthcare, but we do have like a set of guidelines, which is the Agile guidelines, which is kind of jointly developed by MOH, the Ministry of Health, the HSA, Health Sciences Authority, which is the FDA equivalent in Singapore, as well as IHIS, which is our national IT vendor for healthcare systems. So they've come up with this set of guidelines, or guidance material to kind of guide AI developers, AI implementers on what are the best practices. Yeah. So I think it's kind of maybe quite similar.
Yeah, they're similar. I think there's in the experience that we had bringing using AI in clinical practice, because it had never been used in healthcare before, at least as a marketed product. So in our experience, the 2 other sort of governing bodies, they're not AI specific, but were really important. One was for quality of care. So there's a thing called the HEDIS measure, the HEDIS, Healthcare Effectiveness Data and Information Set. And in July of 2020, they declared that an AI exam of the eye counted as just an eye exam, the same as a human exam for detecting diabetic retinopathy. So that was a big hurdle that had to be overcome, a big kind of milestone, I think. And then another one is reimbursement. So governing body deciding whether AI should be reimbursed as like a test, like a lab test. And that happened later in 2020. I think it was in January 2021. So those are sort of governing bodies that I think are enabling, like there's regulatory FDA approval, there's quality of care sort of governance, and then there's reimbursement. And all those things had to happen for AI to be used clinically and adopted.
So that's really interesting, because you're sharing from a US perspective, the reimbursement, comes in, all these challenges that these AI developers have to actually face. So maybe just directing the next question to Amos, who Yeah, so in your experience, in your startup, what are the regulatory challenges that you have actually faced in, especially navigating within, the Singapore, Southeast Asia kind of region? Are there any, particular things or regulatory things that you think should be focused on when you try to get a product or AI product to be, approved?
Yeah, so for us, we took a slightly different approach as compared to most medtech companies. So in general, to give a bit of a context, there are actually a number of reference countries in the world, such as the US FDA, CE Mark. Initially, it was called the MDD, now changed to the MDR. And then generally, companies would go to these reference countries first, get the approval, and then get expedited approval in individual markets. For us, however, due to our market considerations, budget considerations, we actually went directly to a lot of the countries, such as Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia immediately. And we were faced with a number of challenges, actually, that's quite unique for our pathway. And I think one of it is actually related to being able to justify to regulatory authorities, for example, the breakdown of how the AI model was developed. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. There were a lot of back and forth questions about the quality of the data sets, the quality of the breakdown of the data sets, and how the AI actually performed across various jurisdictions, various age groups, and a lot of the questions involved digging into clinical science that were ground truth and then referring it back to the regulatory authorities. And I think that sort of was one of the major challenges that we had. And I think the second one is more related to not just Singapore, but regulations as a whole. So our company actually, we do have some of the best brains in science, in research, in engineering, but it takes a different kind of mind to actually tweak a lot of those knowledge from, let's say, a technology product into a medical device product. So for example, being able to familiarize the team, the engineers, the scientists with existing standards like IT 62304, which is for software medical device development. Something that, of course, our team of engineers, they're very good at releasing products through, agile, waterfall, but they're not familiar with these standards. So onboarding external consultants to train these engineers to a level that they are able to sort of document their processes and release their processes was one of the second challenges that we had. And I think this two challenges did allow us to iterate more effectively as a company. So in general, actually, a lot of people may say regulations are bad, but for us, it actually is good because it allows us and really forces our company to enhance our processes to make sure that whatever we design is in line with clinical standards. And I think I would put a positive spin to it. So despite the challenges, I think even as we approach various authorities, we are able to create a product that, what we call in regulatory terms, design frozen, which is ready for market.
So I really love what you said just now about actually finding all these regulatory requirements helpful in your product development. So I just wanted to put this question out to everyone on the panel. So do you think that having all these governance frameworks, having these regulatory papers, it's helpful to drive innovation in a healthcare setting, or does it actually curtail or put in restrictions on innovation itself? So.
Sure. So I think we hear this view a lot that does regulation stifle innovation, and I think it kind of depends on where you come from. So for example, if you're a startup, you might want to be able to move really fast and not have to worry too much about what you can or cannot do because you want to try new things. But if you come from a highly regulated industry, you may want to be sure what you need to do or what you can do before you go ahead. But I think there's also one other way to look at it, which is what Amos said, which is if regulation or governance is meaningful and effective, I think it can help and support innovation, because you can kind of think of it as think about road signs and fences. If you're let's say you're driving on a mountain road and there's no fences, or you're driving on a highway, 10-lane highway, and there's no traffic signs or traffic lights or anything. So this would be a super dangerous situation, and you might even be it's so scary, I'm not even gonna drive, I'm not gonna leave my house. But once you put some, maybe you put some fences or you put some traffic lights, then you can more safely get to your destination faster and probably safer than if none of this infrastructure existed. So I think you can think of like governance and innovation as kind of similar. And like governance is kind of like laying out like a framework for where you can like safely innovate, and then also help you to not like make very like costly mistakes because someone has already said like these things are too risky, like don't go there, and then you don't have to try and fail. So I think governance can support innovation, and I think it's about finding a balance and like some things you cannot like compromise on, like the health or the safety of people, like society, but then some things you can take a risk. For example, like if it's a business decision, like it's just the worst that can happen is like it costs some money, but if you can accept that risk, then that's where you can like innovate.
So maybe the rest of the panel can chime in. Yeah.
Sure, I can make a couple of comments here. I mean, when we talk about governance systems, right, we're talking about a whole range of mechanisms that can have regulatory effect. Right? We've already talked about the medical device regulations, other sort of IT types of regulations. There's also institutional norms and guidelines that can come in and have sort of regulatory effect, but they're much more applicable and easier to update, especially in a field like AI, which is developing so fast that there is very difficult for regulations, to sort of formal regulations, to keep up. Even harder for the most ominous ones, which is law, so legislation. And there are actually 2 pieces of legislation in Singapore that may come in and hinder innovation. And the first one is the Human Biomedical Research Act. So this is a law that it regulates all research involving humans, and that includes data. Research with data excludes clinical trials, that's under another law. But if you are using any kind of identifiable information in a research context, then that law will come in and apply. And the other law, if you're using, again, any kind of identifiable information, which you might want to use if you're trying to test your AI instrument in kind of real time and be able to find results and so forth back to patients, and that's going to be the PDPA, or this is a Personal Data Protection Act. Which of course has actually been giving a lot of grief to researchers and hospitals alike in Singapore, because they're relatively new, and of course institutions are being very conservative in terms of how they're interpreting those and translating them to their own policies. The other part of the law, the legal kind of terrain, which has not yet played any major role, but we expect one day it might, and that is common law. Legal torts, so negligence, and this is very applicable when you're talking about using these devices in clinical practice, because of course medical professionals are in part guided by their practice by what happens in the court of law. And the big question that's kind of looming, I think the answer is quite obvious, but I'd be interested to know what everyone else here thinks, is the question of responsibility. So when something goes wrong, who is going to be responsible? Is it going to be the doctor? Is it going to be the hospital that's integrating into their systems? Or perhaps is it going to be the developers? So give us a show of hands. Who thinks it should be the doctor? Okay. Who thinks it should be the developer?
Nobody.
Yeah, couple hands.
A lot of developers in this room.
Okay. Why do you think that the developers should be? Okay.
So then the next question is,
Everyone should be responsible. Well, in the current legal system in Singapore, the liability is likely to be held with the doctor, because they're the ones that hold the patient, the relationship with the patient, but there are still a lot of open questions about whether and how far the liability ought to extend into the people who are developing it, and conceivably should be maintaining it, because from what I understand about AI, it's going to be learning, right? So it's not just a point of sale thing. That's it, we've developed it, here's the warranty, see you later.
Yeah, you hit it right on the nail. I think ultimately there are a lot of barriers to getting AI across the line in the US, but does anyone know who holds the hot potato at the end in the US for AI in healthcare? Anyone want to raise their hand? No. It's a developer. Yeah, actually, I didn't even, we were implementing it, and someone, so our system, we put these retina cameras, eye cameras, in primary care clinics. So we have 9 primary care clinics throughout the Bay Area. We're based in Palo Alto, but there's clinics all the way up to Emeryville, down to South Los Gatos. And put the cameras in, install them. And for about a year, we were doing telemedicine. So a physician was reading images taken in a primary care clinic. And in that situation, it falls on the physician, right? The physician is reading, looking at an image, saying what they think, whether the patient has diabetes in their eye or not. And then, but that's what doctors do all day long. They make a decision, and they hope the buck stops with them. They're held responsible. But then we implement the AI. Everyone's excited. We're putting in. We have the HEDIS measures. We have the reimbursement question, and then we have the FDA approval. We had everything. And then all of a sudden, someone says, "Well, who is responsible if it's wrong?" And then I was like, "Wait a minute, I don't know." So then we asked the question. It's actually the company that developed the AI, it didn't have to be that way, but actually they were, Digital Diagnostics was the company that really pioneered in medicine. They pioneered the FDA pathway, they pioneered the HEDIS stuff, and the reimbursement. They figured that stuff out. We got a reimbursement code. It's a whole other thing, a whole mountain to climb. But then the liability piece, they said, if the algorithm is wrong, the liability falls on the company, and that's huge, right? Because then, primary care doctors don't want to be held responsible because they're not eye doctors. They're just having patients come through and getting a photograph on the way out. The ophthalmologists or the eye care providers are actually cut out of the loop. So the AI is reading an image that normally an eye doctor would read, and now the FDA and everyone's saying that the AI is doing the interpretation that a human doctor used to do. So why should it fall on an ophthalmologist? I'm just at home eating dinner with my family. Why am I being held responsible for from the AI? So it actually makes a lot of sense. It's also very daunting for new developers. And so one of the ways, I think safety is a really important point. So safety, that's a big thing in the news now, the generative AI. Is generative AI going to destroy us all? That kind of question. Autonomous driving, the safety of that. The FDA did, I thought, a very wise thing was that for the first AI and subsequent ones, they made there's an image quality module. So the first thing the AI decides is that, can I read this image? So not all pictures of the eye are perfect, right? Sometimes they're blurry, sometimes there's something in the front of your eye that's blocking it, or your pupils are really small. And so there are just bad images, just like you take a bad photo sometimes. So the first thing the AI does is decides, can I read this image or not? And they actually set that bar pretty high. The image quality threshold is very high because the risk of reading a bad image and then a patient going blind or maybe dying one day, if it's another field, that would just be catastrophic. So they set it very high. So there's a high rejection rate actually of images. So then in our system, the rejected images gets routed to a human doctor, and then the human doctor has to decide, can I read this difficult image? They take on the responsibility for that, and then we go from there. And if they say, I can't read this either, send the patient to my clinic. So we have several fail-safes, right? The image gets rejected, AI is like, I'm not doing this. The companies, sigh of relief. and then the doctor can decide whether they want to take it on. So it's not that it all is on the company, but the company has a way out because they can set that standard.
So from what David has described, it sounds like it's a whole implementation science behind this, right? So behind all these AI models. So going back to the question of, how do we then tier the risk of these AI models such that we know who exactly is responsible eventually when something goes wrong, right? So we talked about, if we're going a full autonomous kind of model, meaning no human at all, fully autonomous AI model, then perhaps is the developer going to be responsible? If we're looking at like a semi-assisted model, so you have the AI model doing an initial round of triaging, and then the human comes in to either look at the images that are very blurry or poor, or those patients who seem to have high risk of a certain disease, then the human comes in to really grade or look at the image. Or you have just something that is pure assistive, meaning a clinical decision support system. So maybe Priyan and Amos, you guys could talk a little bit about, do you all take a tiered approach in terms of de-risking the products?
So I think I can share more from the perspective of my company. So for FathomX, we actually encountered this issue before, right? So I think obviously image upload failures, quality of the images, the computational servers in which these images are being sent to all affect the speed and the quality of the accuracy that's being outputted to clinicians. Which is why actually when we actually go for regulatory approval, our device FX memo has been put in as an adjunct assistant. So at the end of the day, clinicians will make the final judgment before they actually are allowed to make a decision that would affect a patient's eventual outcome. And that's actually the first aspect. But for regulatory authorities, one thing that we're starting to see more common, we are approaching a number of countries right now. We do expect to have 9 countries by the end of the year, is questions on who actually is the one who's allowed to use your software, right? So previously we didn't have so much of these questions when we did our initial Singapore application, but now there's a lot more focus on the type of clinicians who are qualified to actually use the software and make certain decisions. And there are more questions on the clinical workflow itself rather than on the clinical performance metrics. And actually going back to Tamra's point, in a lot of regulatory authorities, the idea of AI models performance being more unpredictable over time, how they change over time affecting the eventual outcomes, actually most authorities in the world actually require their AI models to be design frozen, which means that you push a certain version out, you train it with new data, then you put it in the back of your training servers, but when you push a new one that comes out, version 1.2, it's a one with an upgraded performance. And during the initial submission, we are actually required to put in a number of clinical validation studies to ensure that regardless of what it performs, we need to do one step, which is to do a statistical analysis, pull out a certain number of data, and ensure that data is substantially significant, and then test that data in different settings on the AI model and ensures that it still hits a certain level of accuracy. And I think this actually forced us to sort of ensure that the model being pushed hits that level of accuracy regardless of what kind of data sets is being inputted. And this is one of the safe checks that helps our company to ensure that, okay, at least there is a benchmark level of accuracy when FX memo is being deployed. Quite recently, actually last month, I think the FDA did release a new guidance document on pre-submitting some of your data and some of your study protocols and expected data to start to implement in live AI models. And I think that's something that's quite interesting to see, because I think this space is also starting to shape up to see how models being deployed, if they change their performance accuracy over time, how does that affect clinical outcome, how does that affect liability, and how does that actually affect the performance of the model itself. Yeah. And I think, of course, the last one is get good product liability insurance. I think that's more of a commercial thing that we always do before we speak to clients. And I think this is also a requirement by a lot of distributors who actually take our product to sell it to different markets. Yeah.
So I think I can talk about how we govern AI products like within our company. So for for internal use, like software products. So we do take a tiered approach. So some of the things that we've touched on here were like the level of automation, like is it like a support system? Is it completely autonomous? So that's like, so maybe I just list them. So we have like, we consider whether there's like automated decision making. We consider like the level of risk and the like harm of something going wrong. And I think Amos also touched on like who you allow to use your system or access your system. And then I think Tamara mentioned like freezing the model so that they don't like keep learning. So like as we assess the the software systems that are coming in, there could be like so many systems that you cannot assess them like all. You cannot run everything on all of them. So then we take the tiered approach where like which ones are the ones that have high risk or high potential risk and high potential impact that you should really focus on to assess so that you can catch the risks that are like, that you need to catch and like not spend a lot of time assessing the ones that are very low risk. So things we consider is like, is this a system that is going to make decisions that could potentially impact somebody? So, their job, their workflow, safety, et cetera. And is this like, like if the impact is like, something that would be unethical, irreversible, very damaging, then that needs to be assessed more carefully. But like, let's say you're just building a dashboard and it's gonna recommend like movies or something. If you give someone like a movie they don't like no big deal, whatever. Like they think maybe your engine sucks, but like that's it, right? But if you're gonna like tell someone whether or not they have cancer, it's very important that you would check that one very carefully. So another thing is making sure that your users are well trained and they know the limitations of the system, so they don't think that the system can do more than it can actually do, and they also know when they should not use it and when they should use it. So like let's say like, oh, this output is like, this doesn't look so good. Maybe I shouldn't take it at face value, and I should like check before I use this output. And then also models that would, if they're not frozen and they keep learning from live data, we've seen like, I'm sure you've read in like mainstream news, like how quickly like a chatbot that's like, that like talks to people on Twitter can go completely like, down the drain. So models that would like update themselves are also going to be assessed much more carefully than a model that is like frozen and can be like, tested for accuracy.
Okay, so what I'm hearing here, it really depends on what is the use case of your model. Are you using it to improve operational efficiency, for example, and hence the risk tends to be a little lower. But if you're using it to, for example, diagnose cancer without the physician in the loop, then perhaps we probably need to hold it to kind of like a higher bar. So at this juncture, I kind of just want to put a question out there, which is something that I've recently heard from one of the closed-door meetings on AI in healthcare at ATX, which happened last week. So interpretability of AI models, how important is that? Explainable AI, yeah. Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can take it. So, yeah, we often know that for us, we're a classification model primarily, and for us, we are aware of the fact that there are certain aspects of the AI model itself that's a black box solution. You put certain inputs in, and then it outputs certain results, right? And I think that was, of course, one of the challenges that we looked at the start when we started to design FX Memo. Surprisingly, however, from a regulatory point of view, interpretability of the output and how the AI model is being designed is actually more important than interpretability of how the results are being generated. So, I'll give you an example. When we speak to a lot of regulatory authorities and even clinicians, there is a lot of focus on your typical metrics, right? Sensitivity, specificity, your AUC, how it performs under certain conditions, your image quality, etc., right? So a lot of these are more towards how it affects the clinical workflow and how it actually affects patient outcomes. And the second portion is about how the AI model is designed. So things like, what is the design controls you put in place, what's the risk controls you put in place, what's the post-market surveillance and traceability of the AI model itself. But that's at the end and at the start. And surprisingly, when we deal with regulatory affairs, or even when we deal with clinicians, barring clinicians who are very, enthusiastic about science, who are very enthusiastic about how AI models are outputted and developed and designed, a majority of the outputs and considerations came behind how the AI model performs in different considerations. So it is a surprising thing that we learn, but from our experience, interpretability and explainability of the AI itself was not as crucial at our stage of development, but interpretability of the results, the output, how it compares with existing scoring systems. For example, we have a certain scoring system that's a bit different in different countries. It's called the Barrett score, or depending on which country you come from. That how it relates to those results were actually more crucial and more important for, at least for clinicians and regulatory authorities at this stage. But I think that may change as more and more guidelines are starting to come out and more people are aware of how AI is being designed and developed. Yeah, so that's our experience.
Yeah, I think explainability, I mean, just in terms of, adhering to transparency is an inherently a good thing. But I think for doctors, what's going to be important is when the system, gives it a recommendation that it contradicts their own professional judgment. And I think at that point, it's going to be important for the physicians to be able to go back and see the model's reasoning and why it sort of came up with that recommendation, as opposed to the recommendation that they would exercise in their normal professional judgment. Interestingly though, we've been doing some survey work, and there was a survey done in Denmark, which we're going to replicate here soon. And out of all of the values that we could sort of plug in, in terms of explainability, responsibility, whether the system's being tested to minimise bias and so forth, explainability was one of the least concerns for them. Again, the most important one was who's responsible for it, and was it should be the doctor.
So everyone's happy with the black box and not concerned about why it's giving such recommendations.
I think for patients, I mean, how often is a patient scrutinising the rationale of a doctor's diagnosis or their professional or their own expertise? And some may, if you have if you have your own background resources to be able to ask that. But most people aren't going to be able to quiz, the explainability of or any kind of medical device that doctors may use in formulating a diagnosis.
So I mean, following on that, I'm just going to pivot over to more talking about ethics of AI in healthcare. So maybe Tamra, you could just give us kind of like a brief run as to what are kind of the key issues with regards to ethical use of AI in the healthcare space.
Well, we already have been talking about the ethics of AI, and it's actually quite difficult to have a conversation about AI without a whole bunch of ethical issues spilling out. So yes, we've already started talking about responsibility, who should be, as soon as you start asking should questions, what should the AI system do? Who should be responsible? How should they use it? I mean, you're automatically into the discussion of ethics, which we have already started talking about. I guess one that we haven't, one of the issues that hasn't been touched upon yet is about autonomy and respect for patients' rights and so forth. So the question is, should when you go to the hospital, should you be informed by your doctor that they are using an AI-driven or supported device in formulating your diagnosis or coming up with your treatment plan, which doctors are going to push back against a lot because that's kind of their domain of expertise, but certainly in diagnostics. Just out of patient autonomy, should you not have the right to know whether or not your doctor is going to use this AI, which may be biased and prejudiced and have all of this, faulty, biased data, rubbish in, rubbish out, that may harm you? And if so, should you have the right to refuse the doctor, using, or the hospital system using that? That's a question I would open up to.
Yeah, and
everyone
I think
here to discuss.
I would love to hear from David.
Okay.
Love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, we don't force anyone to have the AI look at their eye. It's offered to patients as really as a service. So you think about the overall problem, so diabetes is the #1 cause of blindness. Diabetic retinopathy is the #1 cause of blindness in working age adults in the US and many other countries. And like 80% of patients with diabetes will eventually develop some kind of eye disease. So it's a huge, just incredible burden. And the only way we can prevent blindness from diabetes is, the way to do that is annual eye exams. It's like screening, you know, it's like colonoscopies, which you do every so often years. In diabetes, it's all the guidelines say like every year. In some cases, after you've been seen, you can spread it out. So, and this is a load sharing problem because the population is growing, and the older population, diabetics are growing in number. Number of physicians and eye care professionals is not. It's not the same. And so, if every patient had to be actually did what they were supposed to do is with diabetes is see an eye doctor every year, we would just be our clinics would just be overrun, and like you spend most of your time screening, and usually 8 out of 10 or so patients are normal, but then you're like displacing patients who have an urgent problem. So it creates this challenge. So we need AI. You know, I just want to comment and say that we need it to help us do our jobs, just because of the number of patients that need to be seen who aren't being seen. Because patients with diabetes, as low as 15% of patients, well, it's the other way around, as many as 85% of patients with diabetes are just not seeing their eye doctor. So that's just a big problem. Now, so we offer it as a service because patients with diabetes, when you're given a diagnosis, all of a sudden your life has changed. You have to see a neurologist, you have to see a nephrologist because of your kidneys, you have to see an endocrinologist to manage your insulin. And the eye doctor is like the lowest thing because everyone's, oh, my eyes are fine. I don't know.
That's not true.
Because the human nature is to not do something that there's a problem, right? And you say, oh, my eyes are fine. That's the problem with diabetes. It's a little bit like hypertension. It's a silent killer of your eye. And once you start to have symptoms or blurred vision, it's not too late, but the train is moving. And then you have to get lasers and injections and so forth. So I think you offer a service because we want to reduce the number of visits, for instance, that patients have to be thinking about doing. So you get the diagnosis, you have to see all these doctors. Well, by the way, you can get a picture of your eye taken on the way out, and you don't have to see an eye doctor if you're normal. And that's a service we're trying to provide to patients, and that's really the big reason why patients do it, because everyone has jobs to do, kids to pick up, all these things, and seeing yet another doctor is like another day off you have to take or whatever. So I think people like options, and AI is providing an option that they didn't have before, to have to make yet another doctor's appointment and have to time everything and figure all these things out. So I think we don't force it. We think it's great because it provides optionality.
So I think we have quite a biased panel out here. So we're all pro AI. So we're all talking about how AI can democratize healthcare, how AI can actually narrow maybe health inequity, right? Making it more available, making healthcare or specialist care more available to the general public. But I kind of want to challenge the panel here, as well as the audiences out here. Maybe can shout out. What do you think are some of the dangers of using AI in healthcare that can actually further drive this health inequity divide, right? Perhaps anyone from the audience wishes to kind of voice out, you may just do so.
Well, I can throw my hat in. Well, if the AI models are only as good as the data sets they're trained on, and if they are trained on data sets that are underrepresented by certain minority groups, so ethnic minority groups, then they are not going to benefit from the application of the AI models in clinical practice, and so forth, may help to widen those health inequities rather than close them up. So as developers, what can you do to bridge that? More data. So, well, in the American system, though, so the the ethnic or the underserved populations, they're less likely to be entering into their health systems, you know, to be able to get the data that you'd need to, you know, to train the AI sets in. So,
yeah, ethnicity is an issue. It really depends on how you tackle it. But in our case, we were able to look at different ethnicities in our lab trial in Indonesia, for example. That wasn't the problem. The problem was really getting, in terms of like looking at their blood pressure, getting those people who were hypertensive and those people who were hypotensive, is getting a broader scale across the population to increase its accuracy, regardless of the, you know, the type of person that came through. So ethnicity, you know, you can handle the facial recognition is very good as long as you can obviously train it to those groups, get a broad enough population, and then park that module at that point. But things like blood pressure, you know, diabetes recognition from the retina scans, looking at things like cholesterol from PPG signals, it really requires, you know, intensive amounts of data using new AI transformer models, because it's constantly evolving at such a pace that what you do tomorrow is no longer applicable today. So, you know, that's part of the kind of AI adoption hurdle is you know, keeping pace, getting to the point where you are accurate enough to be used at a population level.
Yeah.
How will it affect the final cost of the product, obtaining all these unique data from all those populations that you were talking about? Will it be more expensive when you will be rolling out the final product into the market?
No one ever said AI was cheap. You know, it really depends on then what your business model is and whether you apply it to a small portion of, you know, the population, in which case, yes, your costs are going to be astronomical, or you apply it across the population, in which case you look for scale. And so, you know, that's really, it comes down to your business model.
Yeah, actually adding on to that, actually Tamra brought up a really fantastic point in application of AI in ethnicities, because so to declare AI in radiology is something that's not new. Over the decade, you know, there's many companies, in fact over 30, that does breast AI itself for 2D mammographies. But we often find that a lot of these companies operate within the region or the area in which they have a base in, or areas where they have very strong research collaborations. And the reason why is because localization of AI is a thing. An AI that performs very accurately on mammal images for us. Mammal images are standardized across various kinds of manufacturers. They are always of a certain quality, not subjected to minimal environmental sort of conditions, but yet the AI performs differently when it's actually being tested across different populations. And one of the key findings we found is that among Asian women, there's actually denser breasts as compared to Western women, which means that the model image itself is white image on top of white image, which means that it's incredibly difficult to read, which also meant that, you know, competitors which have FDA clearance, which actually went through a lot of rigorous testing, when they were tested in Europe, it performed very well. When they were tested in Japan, they actually performed worse than existing radiologists, which is why it's something that has to be taken into consideration. Of course, acquisition of data sets is something that's, that a lot of companies should start looking into, not just for performance reasons, but also for regulatory reasons. I think I've mentioned that a lot of authorities actually start to question about, you know, where is your training data set, where is your testing data set, where is your performance data set, and from among all three, what is the breakdown of ethnicity, and is it well represented and backed by statistical science when you actually push this model out for approval?
Yeah, I think there's an awesome question about the democratization, but also how to prevent the divide, how to prevent worsening of inequity. I think it takes really intentionality. So, and it's kind of, this is kind of a call to all developers, all companies. It's going to take effort to do that. And I just want to say, probably said this in the beginning, I have no financial interest in Digital Diagnostics, the company that we work with to develop this, intentionally, because we want to make sure we have the best system and stuff. There's no, you know, flaw, sort of a ulterior incentive. That said, we've set up the system. It's the Stanford system, and some of these clinics are, you know, they're not all like very fancy, like, you know, clinics out there. They serve a very diverse population. We just published our paper in ophthalmology science. We talk about this whole system. If you're interested in reading about it, please do. But we've set up these 9 clinics, but then, you know, we actually, our institute, we have some sort of mission-minded sort of venues. So for instance, we have a clinic down in Belize. It's called the Belize Vision Clinic. One of my colleagues founded it, and it's like a free clinic for a lot of the working class there, younger working age adults who don't have time to see an eye doctor. We asked the company, would you be able to kind of subsidize a AI system down there? And they, you know, we just sort of reached out to them, and they agreed to. So they're providing free AI algorithm services to that population. And then Stanford opened up a free clinic for the uninsured up in the peninsula, and we asked the same question, will you do the same thing there? And they agreed to. So we have a camera there in a clinic where for basically uninsured patients can come through and get their exam, because uninsured patients, you know, will an eye doctor see, you know, they're lost in the gap that our U.S. healthcare system unfortunately has, because they're out of a job or whatever. And there's another clinic in South Korea where my mother actually is helping to run in her retirement, is running a free clinic for essentially uninsured patients in Korea. A lot of immigrants, you know, who are in Korea and don't have insurance and so forth. So we're planning to put another camera there, and but that took the company agreeing to maybe not make, you know, whatever top dollar or something, you know, because they're not in a premium location, but they have a bit of a mission mindedness. So I guess I applaud digital announcers doing that, and I encourage other developing companies to have that, because unless you intentionally do that, there will be a population that will not benefit from new technology. So you have to really make it hurt. It has to hurt a little bit, actually, in a way, to make it all work for everyone.
So I think we heard a lot from, coming from a data perspective, like, you know, how to make sure you have more, less biased data, get more features, have higher accuracy. But I think another thing that our company, is really important to our company is respecting diversity and inclusion. So I think it's really important to have a diverse team when you're building an AI product, so that you can get multiple views and to actually to engage your stakeholders and understand their needs, and because what's fair to them and what is a good outcome to them might be different from what the developer thinks is a fair or good outcome, because fairness, ethics, morality, right and wrong, these things are highly dependent on your culture, your personal experience, your country's laws, your religion, all sorts of different things, including the use case, the scenario. So I think instead of only focusing on getting more data and trying to de-bias data, get more diverse viewpoints when you're designing your system and when you're testing your system and when you're rolling it out. So that to us is really important.
So that's an interesting viewpoint, because now you're talking about how you incorporate, say, biodesign into market analysis, getting your right stakeholders in to give you that initial inputs as to what kind of implementation model you should be developing towards. So that's actually really quite interesting, because we've talked a lot about data itself, but not really about not really about the team composition.
Yeah, it's about the team who are developing it, and then also making sure that the users that you get feedback from your stakeholders, and that has diverse too. There's both your direct stakeholders, and then there's indirect stakeholders that you have to consider. So not just the people will be using the system, but you also have to consider the people who might end up using your system, who end up being impacted your system, even if they're not the actual users. So they could be unintended users. Maybe if your product is meant for adults, what if a child uses it, or it was meant to be deployed in one country, but other people from another country use it, and maybe it does not align with their values, or it does not align with their laws.
So I think we've talked a lot about AI regulation, about ethics, but I'm kind of surprised that this question hasn't really come up, in this panel discussion, which is, do you think that the general public and even healthcare providers or people in the healthcare space are too overly critical of AI itself? So there's a lot of attention or a lot of news being reported about, traffic accidents with autonomous driving, autonomous vehicles. But, nobody really pays a lot of attention to all the other traffic accidents that's, caused by, your manual cars or your automatic cars. So do you think, just asking the panel, and even people, even the audiences, do you think we are holding AI too overly critical of AI now? Yeah.
You mean, are we holding it to too high
Too
a standard?
high standards and too high regards, yeah.
No?
Why do you think?
Well, I mean, I think you should be, I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't hold it to at least equal standards that we would expect of a human operator. And again, I think it's, because it is so new, I mean, this kind of question of, liability and responsibility is going to be on a lot of people's minds. And just getting to like the autonomous car, there's debate about, it's like the old trolley question: should the AI, if faced with the decision of having to swerve over the road and hit a couple of young school kids, or swerve the other way and inevitably kill the driver? I mean, there's a lot of people who might say that, oh, of course, you should kill the driver. You should kill the kids, not the driver. But really, are you going to buy that car that's going to kill you if it's going to make that decision? I mean, that's the pragmatics of it, right? And that's the marketing. So I think there's just that's like the reality of what people are going to expect from them.
Yeah, I think there's like news and there's like what's, these one-off stories, and I think, in medicine, everything should be and is guided by evidence. And that's why like trials are important. They publish the clinical, it becomes public knowledge, like what, how good is it? What's the sensitivity and specificity of this algorithm and so forth. And then in post hoc data, who are people going blind and are they getting seen by the physician? So I think we just have to be guided by evidence, and that's where the regulatory bodies and governing bodies are important, because I think everyone wants to know, like, I mean, it'd be nice to know, like, if you buy this autonomous driving package, like, how many accidents have been caused by this, and I'm not in that field, so I don't know how you would do a clinical trial of autonomous driving, maybe a bunch of crash test dummies in a big parking lot, I don't know, but there needs to be something like that, because as a consumer, you want to know, like, and why should I get this autonomous package versus that one? So I think outside of medicine, it feels like there's not as much of that. It's a little bit just marketing, and you just have to believe which commercial is more, is speaking louder to you. But I personally would like to be kind of driven by evidence. But for healthcare, like, there was a clinical trial that got the AI approved, but then there's also this post-market surveillance that happens, and like in our site, we're tracking everything. And so the results of the clinical trial are one thing. How that AI behaves in our population in the Bay Area, San Francisco, is quite different actually than the population that underwent the clinical study. And yet we're finding that the AI is doing quite well. And this speaks to the diversity issue. That didn't have to happen, but it's happening. And so we're all quite happy about that. But we continue to track the data. We're going to publish the data. We'll be very transparent about it. And I hope outside of medicine that we'll see that type of rigor, I think, as well.
Yeah, so I guess as someone from industry with financial interests, I'm obliged to say yes. But I think in general, the answer to that is it really goes back down to the baseline, right? So I think similar as well, we are a very clinical evidence focused company. We look a lot at our clinical trials, how it actually performs in relation to the baseline before we actually release a product out. And I think patient safety for us is one of the most crucial components, because we are dealing with a disease burden that's incredibly crucial. In fact, from the incorporation until today, we do know of the incidence rates increasing significantly for breast cancer. And I think, oftentimes when we look at technology, a lot of these like negative things in the media, we do see, hey, AI model predicts something wrongly, hence car crashes. And I think similar for us as well, there will definitely be cases in which, our algorithm being pushed out there is actually interpreting a results inaccurately or not as good as, what we expect it to. But when you actually look at the clinical studies that were being conducted, you do realize that this actually does happen to clinicians as well. So in a typical breast screening program, for example, about 9% of cases are actually false positives, and maybe 15 to 20% are interval cancers, which are cancers that are missed during the screening stage. And we are able to reduce that by up to 38.7% for example, for interval cancers, and even higher for false positives. But 38.7% is not 100%, right? There is still that small percentage that are missed. But we do know that from a baseline level, at least AI is able to significantly enhance the existing accuracy of clinical workflow. So for us, it's not so much about a yes or no, but it's a reference to how are we being harsh to the AI, and how do we actually question the AI's accuracy. Is it in comparison to the baseline? If it performs worse than the existing standard, then yes, we should question it and be harsh on it, because a clinician that doesn't use that tool will end up making a decision that may make a patient lead to horrible outcomes for patients. But let's say if it is because of the 1 or 2 cases, the small percentages, they are not looked at as a whole of the entire clinical trials or deployment of the solution itself, then the answer would be yes. It's a bit more, we shouldn't be too harsh on the tool for that. And I think over time, AI strives to improve as well. We are constantly, and all practitioners of AI are actually constantly trying to develop models that are getting better and better over time to significantly enhance the accuracy while bringing better outcomes to patients. Yep.
So I think from our perspective, the question was, should we hold AI models to high standards, or are we holding them to too high standards? So I think from our perspective, it is highly dependent on the use case and what you're using the AI system for. So if you're using it for like entertainment, you're just going to ask like ChatGPT to like write me a funny song, and it's not that funny, or it says something slightly inappropriate, it's different from when someone's life or their health is in your hands. So to us, like patient safety is very, very important, and we hold that to like the highest ethical standards. So if a model is going to be used for something that could impact someone's life, or like there are future opportunities, yes, the AI system should be held to the same ethical standards as a person who's going to be making that decision without the model. Because why shouldn't you, just because it's a computer and it's not a person, now you can offload it and get it, ask it to do things that you normally wouldn't do, or you that think is not okay to do, so you can push it onto a computer and blame them. That's not aligned with our values. But on the other hand, if it's a system that is meant to be for entertainment, or for a lower stakes situation that's meant to aid a decision, and someone is going to be looking at that output and then using their own judgment to decide do I want to make this decision, then in that case, if it is not as accurate, you still have the human judgment and the human in the loop to make their own decision. And if they are well informed that they are interacting with AI and ultimately they have to make the decision, then that's a different scenario.
I think the criticality, there's vision and there's life, right? If the AI is wrong, you could die that night. That's a whole other, there's acuity, right? So diabetic retinopathy, yes, there's an urgency to it, but there is time. You have time, and seeing a doctor within a month or 2, it doesn't move that fast. But there are vision conditions that if an AI is wrong, you go blind that night. And there's medical conditions, if it's AI is being used to determine whether you have a myocardial infarction, you could die that night. So there's exactly that situation. So I think it needs to be deployed the right way. And that's where autonomous and assistive AI, I think the decision to make it one or the other is really important. There are some AIs, even for this diabetic retinopathy, where there's an assistive module. And so that liability actually falls on the physician, I think, in those most likely in those cases, or maybe it's shared if they're both looking at it. So I think, in our system, it's a hybrid. It's an AI first, then human reads it when the AI says it can't do the job. A little bit like a junior, relatively younger doctor going to their sort of older mentor friends and saying, I'm not sure what to do in this case, what do you think? So that's where we're living right now. And in some cases, it could be the other way around, where the doctor is just overwhelmed with work. AI is helping them do their work better. So I feel like that's where we're going to be for a little while, because even though in our case, like AI reads it, humans still have to do the work to like contact the patient and so forth. Now, maybe one day the AI is going to call the patients and then schedule everything. ChatGPT is going to do all that. That's a whole different world, and maybe we're getting that soon. But I think for now we're kind of in this, we're kind of holding hands and walking together situation.
Those use cases are coming. So the life and death decision. So the decision of if the patient's had a heart attack out of hospital, and they don't tend to do very well if you have a heart attack outside the hospital. It's different when you're already in hospital. But helping doctors to triage. So is this patient likely to survive, or to have a good life after you administer very highly invasive resuscitation, or should we triage them into palliation? Those test cases are coming soon, and of course do elicit these much more difficult questions and these much higher standards, which I think are going to apply.
So I'm just going to have to cut the discussion here, although this is really a very interesting topic. So because I really wanted to give the audience some time to kind of ask the panel questions as well. So I think we might have time for about a couple of questions. So yeah, maybe the mic. Yeah.
Thank you. A question for Amos. When you were doing the regulatory approval in the geographies you mentioned, how important was things such as ISO certification, both for that regulatory approval and for your potential commercial customers? And what would you say the balance would be between the two?
I would say the second is more soft. It's not a hard thing. People don't say it, although it is a good marketing issue when you say that, okay, we've developed in compliance with international medical device standards. For the first, it's more a clear-cut scenario. It's basically the basic requirement. For example, in Health Science Authority, when we did our Class B certification, one of the very first requirements is we need to actually have a manufacturer cert, which is only issued upon getting ISO 13485. And this is also quite similar to a lot of foreign regulatory bodies as well. For example, in Taiwan, there is something called the QSD, which is their quality system documentation or something like that for their QMS. And in order to do a medical device registration, you need to get that first. And in order to get that, they will usually reference back to the ISO back in Singapore. And similar in Malaysia as well. We went through a conformity assessment body. We went there. We actually needed to use our ISO documents, our ISO certifications to get that process in place to certify us before we can register in the NDA. So in short, for ISO, it's actually almost 100% important for a lot of different countries. In terms of whether it's good for the customers, I think it's more of it helps. It's not a must, but it definitely helps.
Thank you. I'm PhD at Imperial College. I guess I have two questions. One is when you were mentioning the dangers of AI in healthcare, I'm wondering about data ownership of the patients, because in the end, my data is making your product better. How much of that product do I own as a patient? None right now, but then there's people doing 23andMe, so they're giving their free data, and they don't even think about that because they think what they're getting is this genetic information. So I'm just wondering about data ownership and patients. And then the other one is how much do regulatory bodies like the FDA, should they be held accountable if an AI product doesn't work well, because they're supposed to be the ones protecting the public, right? So in the opioid crisis, for example, if they didn't do a good job measuring how addictive one of the opioids was, how much is that their responsibility, not just the developers, because they're supposed to be there to put regulations in place to say this is good enough to be used.
I'm just going to add on to what she she asked just now. So with regards to data ownership, and I'm just going to add on one more spin to it, which is informed consent. Is that necessary and is that important? Yeah, so maybe.
Oh wow, amazing questions. The data ownership thing, I'm going to, so I am part of a nonprofit called the Collaborative Community on Ophthalmic Imaging. It's a consortium of major stakeholders all around imaging and AI, including the FDA, the National Eye Institute, all the professional societies, the payers, and every stakeholder you can think of all. And we have these meetings every year, virtual conferences that are all recorded. And we just had a meeting last January where actually that exact topic was one of the sessions. So it's all, you can sign up and actually review the recordings, and the speakers will do a much better job than I can say to kind of elaborate on that topic, because it's a really important topic. I don't know if it was this year or the year before. So it's ccoi.org, it's just a little plug. And we have another conference in January that we're holding that is talking even more about these topics, like including generative AI and so forth. So that's my answer to your question on that one. But I think you'll get more out of it if you check out that one. And then as far as the FDA, I think there's, I also can't speak to that because I'm not part of the FDA, although we work closely with them on different initiatives. And I think some of those answers do come up in that conference. So really the top minds in the field are there, and I think that's a good resource for you.
Okay, so if there are no more questions from the audience, I think we can, proceed to close the session today. So thank you very much, all the panelists, for the very engaging discussion. Thank you, audience, for being very interactive today. Do stay on for the networking session later on if you want to speak more with our panelists or kind of just mingle amongst yourselves. Do feel free to do so. So with that, thank you.